Hi, Jenny. Hey,
Hi,
everybody.
good evening, everyone. Hope
Good
everyone is having
evening.
a fantastic week and happy Wine Wednesday.
Yes, be Wine Wednesday to everybody.
Awesome. So, we're going to be diving into a really fun topic today, which Michelle's going to introduce here in a second. But as always, wanted to chat with you guys about our wine pick for this week. In keeping with summer, wanted to go with a lighter varietal, one that's a little bit crisper. So, we are going with I don't know if you guys can see the bottle here, but this is a Jean Jus, which is a varietal from the Alpine region of the Savoy in eastern France. The Jacquard grape varietal is a local white grape varietal in that area. It's honestly kind of like a well-kept secret. It's super crisp, super floral. You're going to have a little bit of peach tones, a little bit of lemon zest. It reminds me of a much more interesting Sauvignon Blanc. Which reminds me also, I'm going to put out, I know there are a lot of us that really love Sauvignon Blanc and how crisp it is and how easy it is to drink in the summer. There are so many other grapes that are more interesting, a little bit more dynamic and super amazing that are really light and crisp and zesty. This one is one of my go-tos. This is also a French wine that is really affordable, which is hard to find. So definitely a really great one if you guys are, in keeping with wanting a lighter wine that is just a little bit easier to go down. It's lower ABV as well at 11.5%. So really great brunch wine. And overall, just kind of a general crowd pleaser. So one of my favorite regions and definitely a well-kept secret grape. So with that, let's go into our rose and thorn for the week. Michelle, what do you got?
Yes, so let's start. We'll start with my rose. So I actually just recently joined a new gym in New York, and yay, it's pretty bougie gym. But the coolest part of it is that there's actually pools that you could go to in New York City on rooftops, and
You didn't tell me that part.
Yeah. So actually in Hudson Yards, there's like a rooftop pool, like right where built like the new vessel, and it's like overlooking the vessel. So it's very cool that you could be lounging at the pool, just overlooking, the West Side Highway and all these like cool structural buildings.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Totally worth it.
Yes, totally worth it. So that's my rose of the week. But thorn of the week, I don't know if any of you East Coasters are experiencing this, but the Canadian wildfires are actually, traveling down to the East Coast and making the city very smoggy, very hard to go out in. Once you step outside, it smells like smoke. You could actually see the smoke. So just having to hide out, until it ends. Which, if you know me, I don't like to be kept inside. I like to be out and about. So
Michelle needs to spread her wings and flourish, you guys.
Exactly. What about you, Jenny? What are your rose and thorn for the week?
Okay, so my rose for last week was definitely unexpected on my end. I went to a wedding with a really good friend of my husband's from college. I've only met this person a couple of times, but I've always had really lovely experiences with them. But their wedding was one of the most fun weddings I've ever been to. Like, when I tell you, this bride thought of literally everything, to the point of like they got married on grass. So there were these little like heel stoppers that you could put on the bottom of your heel so you didn't sink into the grass. Like, when they were serving, when they were taking us to our tables, they gave us like champagne glasses with our name and table number on it to walk us to the table. They had like slippers for when you got to the dance floor, so you didn't have to wear your shoes and like hurt your feet. And my personal favorite part of the wedding was literally they hired like a 10-piece jazz band, and they were like performing like some of my favorite disco songs ever. So I was like in hog heaven and like dancing away the night away. It was like the best unexpected time ever. So I loved it.
That sounds so fun.
It was so fun. And then my thorn was I love the Women's College World Series for softball because it just is like reminiscent of my childhood, and I love it. So I watch it every year, and I've even like strong armed my husband into getting into it as well. This year, Okay, so for those of you who don't know, OU is about to win a three-peat. Like they dominate in the space. Like they won 2 years in a row. They're probably going to win this year too. So as much as I respect the hustle and as much as I respect them, I want to see them upset. So none of my schools are even in the tournament, but this year Stanford went and they had a freshman pitcher, Nigeri Kennedy, and she throws 65 miles an hour, you guys, which is like unheard of. Like any of the women who are hitting off of her are closing their eyes and getting lucky as far as I'm concerned. So anyways, they played OU yesterday with the chance to potentially advance. And unfortunately, they lost in 9 innings. So I was super sad because yet again, OU is in the championship, which, I mean, they really are the best of all time. So what can you do?
Exactly. Maybe next year.
Maybe next
year. Yeah.
OU, you guys. Although you guys are curious, the game is tonight and Florida is playing them. So we'll see.
Okay. Ooh, okay. We will see. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to introduce our topic here. So this week, we're going to be talking about leveraging real estate as an investment strategy. We actually have our own fabulous Jenny talking about her experience. And, I'm sure you guys are wondering why Jenny, who is the wonderful tax attorney that she is, speaking to us about real estate. Well, she actually has a pretty impressive real estate portfolio herself and also journey. She actually went from 0 homes in 2020 to 4 homes in 12 months from that. So, and that's really freaking impressive, Jenny.
Thank you. It was a doozy.
It was a doozy. I want to hear about the doozy here. So, Jenny, can you tell us, what made you want to start investing in real estate and how did you get started?
Yeah. So I think on some level, I always wanted to be a real estate investor. But as we've talked about a million times on this show, I had imposter syndrome in my brain. And like the thought of even buying one home as a primary residence was overwhelming for me. And I had simply no idea how to scale from there. So I always had it in the back of my brain. I was always really interested in it. I was definitely one of those people who was like poking around on Zillow to see like what was popping up in the neighborhood and kind of what that looked like, and doing a little bit of recognizance in terms of like searching for people who had done it before. I'm a reader, as I've mentioned, so reading books about it, listening to podcasts, just kind of seeing what it would take to actually initially get started. And what I think is really important that I don't hear a lot of people talk about is before you even get started on any sort of investment journey, whether it's in real estate, whether it's stocks and bonds, whether it's, whatever it is that your plan is with yourself or your financial advisor, I think it's really important to lay a foundation. And at the time that I was really thinking about getting started in real estate, which was way before 2020, my personal finance situation was a mess, right? Like I lived in a constant state of anxiety. I was making really good money, but I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't laying any foundation in terms of preparing myself. So I think the first step many, many years before I got started investing in real estate was laying that foundation and confronting all of the issues that I was having with that, from a budgeting standpoint, from getting my affairs in order, from saving for an emergency fund. So I lovingly refer to this time as my like financial literacy journey. So right. Michelle, the financial advisor, loves that.
Yes, love that.
So during that time, I paid the majority of my debts down. I started saving for my emergency fund, and something that is not sexy that I had to do, for the majority of my mid-20s was I never lived in the sexy apartment. I never drove the sexy car. And I was making really good money at this time, but I lived well below my means, to the point where I was saving 50 to 60% of my salary because I was really strategic about what it was that I was spending money on. For example, my thought process was, if I'm renting something and I have the aim to buy something in the future, I don't need that something that I'm renting to be like 10 out of 10 or like to the 9s. All I cared about was living in a convenient apartment that was in a safe area. And that was really what I would look for. And so that really got me in a good path in terms of laying that foundation and putting an emergency fund in place, which was there, for all the purposes that emergency funds are. And once you have an emergency fund, you can start to build on top of that, right? Have that as a foundation, and then start to really put the funds together for whatever project it is that you want to invest in at the time. So that was really my thought process on like the, I guess, logistical side and like the logical side and thinking about it from that perspective. But outside of that, I mean, I really wanted to get started investing in real estate for a lot of reasons. One, I saw the potential for a safer investment vehicle because unless you're doing it absolutely wrong, there's almost a guaranteed upside at some point, whether it be through the rental income or through the appreciation. The other two strategies that kind of became available to me as things started to progress and I started my own business was you can avail yourself to different tax advantages and depreciation. And even if your asset isn't doing as well as you want it to, you can leverage that for different reasons. Like for me, if I'm saving on my taxes and I'm not cash flowing a property, that's still a good investment, right? So there's different areas that you can look at it. And then lastly, I mean, I fell victim to the same thing that I think a lot of people do, at least initially, where I was like, real estate is sexy. Real estate looks fun. There's so many things that you can do with it, right? And we'll get into it a little bit later, kind of like debunking that like sexiness that you see portrayed online. But I still maintain, even now, like there are so many advantages to choosing this vehicle, at least initially, to get started. And I think, the first thing that you do is you buy your primary residence. I think a lot of people don't understand that that is the beginning to your portfolio. They more so, and I know that it's a liability, right? Because you're not cash flowing it and you're living in it, but it is appreciating, hopefully. And it puts you in a position where you can get started, right? So the reason that and we'll get into this a little bit later, but one of the reasons that we were able to accumulate property so quickly is because we got started in a time frame where interest rates were really good. And we were able to get into it. And even though interest rates were really good, I got approved for a house that was way more expensive than the one that we initially bought. So you don't have to look at your first purchase as the end all be all. You just have to look at it strategically, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Yes, definitely. Okay. Next, so what can you tell us about some resources that you found helpful along your journey?
Yeah. So there's so many. Obviously, I've mentioned this before. We live in the information age, and there's a million different resources that you can avail yourself to get content about whatever it is that you're interested in. Having said that, I would definitely caveat that to make sure that you're looking not just at people's highlight reels. Like, don't just look at Instagram where someone is talking about how much money they're making off of Airbnb and how much they're cash flowing. I guarantee you, most of those people that you see posting content are leaving out costs that are happening that are occurring in their business. They're saying, look, these are the numbers. This is the mortgage. These are the bills that I had to pay. And this is how much I made in a given year. It cash flows. Well, that's not accurate in a lot of cases because there are a lot of costs that are not accounted for, especially if you're in an Airbnb model, which we'll get to a little bit later. So just make sure you're careful who you're taking your advice from and that you're doing. Yes, you can, treat it like a grocery store, right? Go and take what makes sense to you and then do your due diligence on the rest of the pieces, right? Because you need to make sure that from an investment standpoint that it makes sense for you. So definitely do your research that way. That's been an amazing resource for me. A couple of podcasts that are paramount in my journey for how I leverage real estate. First and foremost, for Airbnb, there's this podcast called Thanks for Visiting. And it's these two women that are in the Midwest and they have turned their full-time job into investing and running Airbnbs. And what I love about that podcast is they don't hide behind the glitz and the glamour, right? Like they talk to you from a realistic standpoint about what it takes to run an Airbnb. An Airbnb is not passive income. If you think that an Airbnb is passive income, you're sorely mistaken. It's literally you purchasing an asset and then you have to become a hospitality business because that's what it is.
Right.
You have to be at your guest's beck and call. You have to make sure that you're giving them personal touches, because occupancy and reviews and all of those things are paramount for the success of your Airbnb. And it's not a set it and forget it type of model. And in most cases, you can't really find a property management company unless you're in a super luxury property that is going to do right by your property in terms of increasing profitability and making it make sense. So that was a really, really good resource for me for that. And then, of course, I would be remiss not to touch on Bigger Pockets, which is a podcast that it's literally probably the foremost podcast on real estate investing in the world. Amazing information on there. But again, I would advise you, they bring guests on a lot, right? And not every single guest situation is going to be your situation. So you have to take it with a grain of salt and make sure that it makes sense for your situation. But for me, what was so huge was just the educational component and getting me to kind of like speak the language, if you will, to understand a little bit more about what real estate investing was and meant and how to leverage it. And then lastly, that one has been really helpful for me for my long-term rentals, which has been great. We have, so just for your reference, we have 2 Airbnbs, one long-term rental, and then our primary residence. So it's nice to have kind of a smattering of places where they touch on those different subjects, because they're very different business models. And if investing in an Airbnb and getting started along that journey is something that you want to do, honestly, now we have so much information available to us. I'll be fully transparent with you. The first Airbnb that we purchased, I did not do as much due diligence as I should have. However, it ended up working out. But there is this beautiful platform called AirDNA. And essentially what it allows you to do, I think it's a small fee. You can do a monthly fee, or you can just join for a month and then get the information that you're needing for vetting a specific property. And then you don't have to keep, subscribing after that. But essentially what it does, you can plug in the address of a home that you own or one that you're looking to purchase, and then run a data analysis on how much money they think that you can make on that in a given year. And
very cool.
It's really, really, it's an amazing tool. And if you're doing your due diligence, you can really essentially take that and stack it up against what your costs are going to be, and then see what your profit margin is. And I would really, really advise you, there's a couple pitfalls that I think a lot of people fall into when it comes to AirDNA or Airbnb. They look at that data and they say, yeah, but I'm going to decorate the house way cuter than AirDNA knows. Or I'm going to kind of ignore it. And I will say that when it comes to investing in real estate and putting it in specifically Airbnbs, decorating is paramount and important, but it's not necessarily going to make you more money. It might raise your occupancy slightly. It might give you that competitive edge over a similar property as someone is trying to book, but it's not gonna make these huge sweeping leaps from a revenue perspective that you might be projecting based on looking at that data. Well, mine's gonna be way cuter. Terrible pitfall to fall into. Make sure you've got a healthy profit margin before you consider putting an offer in on a house, because that's something that software is there to help us. And you have certain tools at your fingertips to be able to accomplish that.
Perfect. Great advice. So after initially purchasing the first property, what other strategies did you use to continue accumulating real estate?
Yeah, so this is the biggest thing that I think a lot of people sleep on as well. When you're working to build a portfolio of real estate, not only is it important to find a really amazing real estate agent, because they will actually help and guide you and put you in a position to get the best ROI on a property that you're putting an offer in, but it's just as, if not more important, to get a really amazing lender who can guide you through the financial implications and give you insight as to how to accumulate the property that you want to. So for us, I was really, really transparent with my lender early on about, hey, like this is our primary, but like these are our plans for the future. So I want you to keep that in mind and give me advice as to strategic moves that I can make to make that happen. So unless you're moving across the country or somewhere that's a little bit further away from where you live initially, you typically have to stay in your primary residence for a year before you can then buy another primary residence. So, and get the same, and the reason that I say primary residence is because whenever you're buying a primary residence, you can put anywhere between 3 to 5% down, as opposed to the 20 to 25 that a lot of people talk about. So the barrier to entry is a lot lower. You also get more favorable loan terms and interest rates for a conventional loan on a primary home than you would any other home. So it's a lot easier to get into that primary residence. So what we did, it was a little bit funny the way that we strategized around it to kind of make sure that we were maximizing our initial property. We were able to put 5% down because we leveraged a conventional loan. Interest rates were great at the time, but like I said, that's almost irrelevant. The interest rates, you just have to look at it with the purchase price and see what makes sense for your budget when you're running the numbers. So we bought that primary residence, and then from there, instead of rolling that over, which a lot of people do this, what they'll do is they'll wait a year and then they'll get a renter in that house and then get another primary residence at 5%. The beauty of leveraging that strategy is if you stay in a house for a year and then you buy another primary residence, a lot of times if you get an executed lease for a long-term renter on that initial property, a lot of times the bank will forgive 75% of that rent off of your DTI. So you can still qualify for a pretty good house, especially if you bought under your budget initially. So you can do that every year, and then you can have 12 properties in 12 years because you have long-term tenants, and typically they're going to be cash flowing if you made a good investment, right? What we ended up doing is you can purchase up to 2 second homes. So after we bought that first home, we wanted to make our second purchase sooner than a year. So we purchased our second home, which required a 20% down payment in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which is, for those of you who don't know, the LSU Tigers are there. So huge, huge sports town. My husband's from there originally, and he had season tickets. So we thought we'll go for football season. We'll rent it out as an Airbnb when we're not there. And what was beautiful about that purchase is we were able to get a condo. Which is a good and a bad thing, right? The property cash flows every month as an Airbnb, but typically buying a condo is not a safe play for appreciation. So you have to know that you're okay with that. A lot of times you can't get cash flow and appreciation all at the same time in a bag. You just have to look at what makes sense for you. So for us, we were able to put the 20% down, treat that as our second home, and go on down the road. Then once we had been in our house for about 10 months, we started we were living in Houston at the time. We wanted to move to Austin. So we started the qualification process of buying another primary at that point. So we were able to, once everything was ticked and tied, we got a renter in our Houston house, which was our primary residence. And we were able to forgive up to 75% of that mortgage she was paying, or that rent she was paying, off of our DTI, which meant we could qualify for an additional primary home in Austin. And then from there, we bought our second home in Galveston as another Airbnb, where we put the 25% down. So that's how you strategize with your lender. And you can either do it, year over year if you don't necessarily have the funds, or you can do it that way and get a little bit more strategic. Like I mentioned, we were very, very aggressive savers before this. So we had put a lot of money aside with this strategy in mind. So things to think about. I think the first thing that you should always do if you want to get into this field is buy primary and convert it. Connect with a really good lender. Make sure you're looking at your down payment strategies, and make sure you're accounting for, like right now, interest rates are really high. That's fine. Obviously, you can refinance those. You can't, repurchase the property for a lower rate. So you just need to look at properties that are a little bit lower so the cash flow still makes sense for you. If you want to get invested or started in real estate. So these are all things that I was given advice about, or that I dug into a little bit further that I didn't initially know. I thought you just had to have 20% all the time. And then you just had to just be like rolling in money to start making this happen. But it's just, I mean, it's little steps that you can take one at a time.
Yeah, oh, great advice. Thank you, for sharing those strategies with us. And I know, everybody thinks real estate is glamorous. I am the victim to watching Selling Sunset. You guys watch it, and
I'm gonna have to tell Mitch, because you guys would be besties about that. He's obsessed with it.
Yeah, so definitely have to talk about that. But always seeing, so actually I think like a meme that came out was like, in order to sell real estate, you have to, dress up in a ball gown. It's like they come out with these like lavish outfits. So it's just like, what's going on?
Their clothes are so horrible. I'm like, what's happening?
I know, but we see that and we all think, glamour, but there are for sure some hurdles there. And can you just tell us a little bit about what's the biggest hurdle that you came across on your journey here?
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, it's hard to pick the biggest hurdle. I'm here to debunk for you guys that real estate is not always sexy. And anybody who's telling you that is lying to you. There's going to be massive, massive hurdles that get into your way. I'll just give you guys a couple examples. The first night that we rented out our Airbnb in Baton Rouge, like somebody brought their animals, and let's just say they weren't potty trained, and it was all over the house, and they threw a party. And it was a very, really amazing entry into our first hosting experience. We've had a couple occasions of that happening again. For our first long-term rental situation, we had a woman that applied that looked amazing on paper, and things were going great, and we couldn't get in touch with her landlord prior. And we were like, okay, well, everything looks great, so we don't necessarily need to talk to her landlord. Well, it turns out she wasn't paying her rent on time ever. So that's a tip that I always give people, is like, if you can get in contact with, when you're going through the application process, if you can get in contact with your tenant's prior landlord, I think that's paramount, because you want to know that they were a good tenant. Like, that landlord could tell you what went down. And of course, like, every once in a while is fine, but if it's a habit, I want to know about that so I can consider that in the application process. Let's see, what were some of the other unforeseen costs. This is something that people don't think about, right? I cannot make this up. This year, on the exact same day, our hot water heater in Baton Rouge and Galveston broke.
Wow. Okay.
On the same day. And just for your reference, those things ain't cheap. Like, it's like $2,500 to replace. And these are costs that you have to think about whenever you're purchasing a property. Our Galveston house was brand new and it broke. And so thankfully that one was under warranty, so we got a little bit of relief there. But in Baton Rouge, we didn't have any assistance, and you have to account for that whenever you're doing your profit loss statement. And I don't think a lot of people think about these costs that keep incurring. The other thing that is really big if you're going to run an Airbnb is make sure you either are cleaning the property yourself, or you obtain somebody who can uphold the standards that you need for your property. Having an Airbnb that is not tidy and not expressed as it looks in the pictures is the fastest way for it to go downhill. You live and die on your reviews. And that is the number one thing people are going to talk about in reviews, is if the place is not clean. So we physically cannot clean the Baton Rouge house. So we have gone through our fair share of hurdles with that, and making sure that we have somebody that was right for the job and that they were doing a good job, because when you pay money for something, like, it should be reflected as is in the pictures. So those were a lot of our struggles that we faced initially. I think another one is figuring out a way to compartmentalize, because like I said, you're in the hospitality business and the Airbnb business. So if you're on a date night with your husband and your guest can't get into the property, or your guest is having some sort of an issue, you have to help that guest at that point. And I will say that the majority of the experiences that I've had with my guests has been positive. But there are those outliers who have been pretty terrible, and you have to that's something that will blow up your Friday night or your Saturday night, and you have to deal with it right then and there. There's no really boundaries that you can set with that person, because they're renting your house. You're in the hospitality business. So those have been really the biggest things that we've had to overcome. And thankfully, we've got a lot of strategies in place to make sure that we're doing everything we can on the front end to make sure that stuff like that doesn't happen.
Okay, good. And it's actually funny to hear the perspective that you're talking about. It's not that you're just buying real estate. If you are renting out your house, putting it on Airbnb, you are in the hospitality industry. I think a lot of people don't think of it like that. It's just, oh, okay, let me just buy this house and that's it. But yeah, it's so important that, your guests are happy, so it reflects on you and also your future business.
Absolutely. Especially if you want to continue to scale your business, right? Like if you, like Airbnb rewards you, if you have a certain number of stays, they give you what's called super host status, which we've had, which is great because it boosts you in the algorithm. But if you slip, then you can lose your super host status. And let me tell you, there are guests who filter only by super host. So you have to be really careful that you're managing your property well.
Got it. Okay. So I know, in this economy right now, a lot of people are shying away from real estate, don't really want to invest in it, but are there any geographical locations or types of properties that you find attractive, in this current state?
Yeah. So duplexes always, because you can house hack. So that's something that if you're working with a real estate agent, I would definitely talk to them about that and see what their knowledge base is on that, because a lot of times many people are just looking for that Instagram perfect primary home. So there's less competition on those homes, puts you in a better position from an ROI perspective, and you can live in one side and rent the other one out. So that is something that I always think that you should look into. And the other one, pro tip, in all seriousness, I really think that college towns are great towns to invest in if the numbers make sense. And the reason that I say that is because there's always something going on, right? Whether it's a sporting event, whether it's a graduation, whether it's parents' weekend. I can't tell you how much traffic we get from that for LSU. We live, because our condo at LSU is a mile from campus. And obviously LSU is a little bit of an outlier in the sense that they're bananas about sports there. Everybody is crazy about sports. But I would argue that most of the schools in the SEC are same. And that would be something that you could look into, and obviously put that through a filter, like use AirDNA, you guys. Don't just say college town. Jenny said college towns. Let's go look in college towns. But I'm just telling you, I've run a lot of analytics on college towns and seen that, I mean, it's the same story, right? It's football season, it's baseball season, it's basketball season. Parents are coming for X. Like there's always something going on. Yeah. So that's a really good area for you to look in. But I think it's just really important to remember that one of the most crucial factors in real estate investing is location. Properties in desirable areas are just going to do better from an appreciation standpoint and from a rentability perspective. So just making sure that you understand the local market of where you're looking, the neighborhood amenities are huge. What's around you? Can you walk to anything? And then another thing that a lot of people forget about is future development plans. If that's something that's readily available to you, you want to know that. So you know, is it going to appreciate? Or am I buying a house that's right next to, a soon to be planned apartment complex that's going to go up right here? All of these things are questions that you should be asking yourself before you invest in real estate. Because one of the things that my real estate agent told me initially on our first house when we were looking, because we could not decide where we wanted to live, she said, location is the only thing you can't change about your house. So you need to remember that when you're investing in a property.
Yes, very important. Okay. Can you share some key lessons that you have learned?
Yeah. Lots of things that have happened in my journey. I think the biggest lesson that I have taken away from investing in real estate as an investment and not a primary residence is you cannot be emotional about these types of things. You cannot walk into a house and say, oh my God, the view is gorgeous. These finishes are amazing. That's never a reason for you to buy an investment property. You have to run the numbers, because otherwise you end up in a situation where you're upside down, which I have before. Okay. So with full transparency, most people who accumulate properties end up in a scenario where they bought something that didn't make the most sense. And that's okay. That's part of it, right? It's just having a strategy around it and making sure that you're not buying something for an emotional reason. Another thing is, we've already touched on this, but don't think it's passive, y'all. Even for long-term rentals, it's not set it and forget it. You have to interact with your guests. You have to make sure that everything is up and running. If there's any sort of damages on the property, you have to take care of it. There's a lot that goes into that. The other thing is make sure you're heavily vetting your prospective tenants. If you do have a property that you want to turn into a long-term rental, that's something that, through the application process, you can do that very easily. And you should really lead into that. The other thing is, and this happens in the housing market when people are trying to sell their houses as well, don't be greedy. Like, you need to put so the average rental property makes $200 to $500 a month. Okay. You're not getting rich off one. And you never should think that you're going to. I mean, obviously that's average, so there are going to be outliers, but you need to price your rental appropriately considering the comps, because if you overprice your rental and it sits on market for a long period of time, then you're losing money. Any period of time where the property is vacant, you're losing money. So make sure you're doing that. Make sure you're doing your due diligence. It's vital. You have to evaluate the property's condition, the market comparables. You have to do a thorough inspection and make sure that you're buying a house that makes sense for you and you don't have a bunch of unforeseen costs that you're going to get hit with as soon as you close on it. And then also just connecting with a good lender, making sure that you understand your financing objectives and making sure that when you're putting a trajectory together, what does that look like for you? How can you start to make strategic decisions surrounding that? And then I think, obviously for me in my journey, having that emergency fund and then the additional money that we were able to save to get started, because especially if you're breaking into the Airbnb space, you're gonna have first of all, whatever budget you put together to furnish the house, double it. Like, you are gonna have to spend way more money than you initially think to fully furnish a house. And something that it's so expensive. You just furnished your apartment, and it's like, I see so many people who, they want to purchase a house and then they're like, oh, I need to do this. And so what they're doing is they're only looking at purchase price. That's a mistake. You need to look at all of the numbers. Sometimes the cheapest house is the money pit and the one that's going to give you zero ROI. Whereas if you can afford a more expensive house, doing the numbers and the analysis for all of these things. And what I find people get in trouble is when they try to hedge their bets and they're like, oh, I'll just buy something kind of in the middle because and this is too cheap and I'm not quite comfortable with that. And when you think about it, that doesn't make any sense. You just have to look at the numbers. Yeah. So I see that a lot.
Okay. Well, closing out here, what advice would you give someone just starting out in real estate investing and thinking that they want to get into it?
Okay, so I would say to make sure that obviously it's not fail safe or foolproof, but just make sure that you're beginning with the end in mind. Know what your end goal is and what it is that you're trying to accomplish so that you can make strategic steps to get there. Do your research. It is so important to do your research. If you don't have the data points, then you can't make an informed decision. Kind of piggybacking off of what I was saying before, like, make sure you're not playing it safe either. Like, don't just choose like, oh, this is medium and I feel comfortable with this. Like, you really need to make sure that you're looking at every single factor. If you can afford it and if you put the money aside for it, sometimes it pays to take that leap, right? Like, I'll give you a prime example. In Galveston, the market is really saturated with Airbnbs. And the ones that are getting ROIs and that are performing are the ones that are beachfront. So you walk out of your house and you're immediately on the beach. Well, you're not getting into those for $200,000 to $300,000. you have to shell out a little bit more. But if you're making more money as a rental, cash flow is cash flow. So you just have to look at it from that perspective. And then lastly, as I've been saying, my refrain, if you will, from the very beginning, save your money, y'all. Like, do what you can. Anytime you're going to, jump in with both feet to an investment project, you have to set aside, a certain amount of money. And although I've indicated that you don't need, as huge of a bucket as you might think, you still do need the funds to pay for closing costs, to pay for the down payment, to have an emergency fund for each of your properties in case anything happens. So those are really like the major tenets that I wish that somebody could have told me before I got started.
Great. Well, thank you so much, for sharing on this topic. I'm sure we all got some good advice from it. Now we could all start, our own real estate journeys and go out there and start investing in real estate.
Absolutely. If you guys have any, right? If you guys have any questions, I'm definitely happy to be a resource. And if I don't know the answer, I would love to help find somebody that does, for sure.
Yes. Perfect. Okay. And as you know, I am the quote queen. Deemed myself that a few weeks ago. So I'm going to leave off with 2 quotes. I try to make it actually involving real estate, but one of them actually kind of gave me a hint when you said location, location, location. I love that one. And the second quote, kind of research, was don't wait to buy real estate, buy real estate and wait.
Love it. We love buy and hold strategies around here, you guys. We love it. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. We are going to start providing, I know we posted the wine pick for this week. We're going to start providing that a couple days in advance so you guys know what's coming. But just in case you guys want to go to the store now, next week we are doing Cansamoy Xarel 2021 vintage, which is the Xarel from Spain. It's another alternative to a super crispy white wine, but it has more character and more flavor. I call it Spain's white Burgundy. So if you love white Burgundy, I think you're really going to love this varietal as well. And I'm excited for you guys to dive into that with us next week.
Yes. Okay, well, I hope everyone enjoys their evening. Go get a glass of wine, finish your Wine Wednesday, and we will see you all next week. Thank you again, Jen.
Of course. Thanks, Michelle. Happy Wednesday, y'all.
Bye.